We also ask you to extend the same comfort and grace to Justin and Sarah as they eagerly await their first baby. Father, we're so thankful for this church and for all we mean to each other. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If anybody's in here who's going to class or teaching class, I'll put that microphone on. I don't know why I didn't. Change it out. Can't be responsible. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yeah.
Okay. If Ron says we're on, we're on. Well, when you're not here for a week, it feels like forever. For me, it does. I don't know if it feels like that for y'all. Okay, good. I don't feel so bad. Been talking to y'all for a couple of weeks about the church and about what the church is, and I know it's a familiar subject to a lot of us because we've been talking about it or living it, most of us, our whole lives. But what I'm trying to do is not to rehash old stuff, but to rethink about what we've all thought about for a long time. I asked someone recently, we were talking about they said something about the true church. And I said, what's the true church? What does that look like? So they began to describe it. And I thought as they were describing that those are not the ways that the Bible describes the church. When we think about what defines a church, the Bible a lot of times uses metaphors. And the thing about metaphors is you got to understand what's it being compared to, and you can't take it too literally, but you got to take it somewhat literally. I listened to a speech 2 years ago from a guy at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and he was talking about teenagers online and iPhones and apps and all these things, and he was going through a list of things, and he was going through all the apps that teenagers use. And one of the apps is, I'm just going to kind of throw this out there in case you didn't know this, you know just how bad it is in our world, and if you have family members who have kids and they're not paying attention, you might want to nudge them a little bit. TBI agent talked about a new app that had come out, and on this app, you download it and you hit a button, and it just randomly dials somebody for you to FaceTime. And so that person opens it up, and now you're FaceTiming a total stranger in a whole other state. Anybody see anything scary about this? Well, some teenagers got that app, and it opened up. It's right here in Tennessee, right here in Middle Tennessee. And these girls went to a Christian private school right here in Nashville. I ain't telling you which one it is, but they're high schoolers there, so they thought this was kind of funny. And so it opened up, and there's this man who's sitting there. And so the girl laughed and shut it down, and then she had a big slumber party. She had all of her girlfriends over. And they thought they'd use this app 4 or 5 times to see who they got. And one of the people who opened it was another man who was in another state. Well, 2 weeks later, there's a basketball game, and this man showed up at the basketball game where these girls cheered. And the reason he did is because these girls, when they were playing this game, had their school shirts on, which school they went to. And so he showed up to get one of those girls. And on the one hand, we may think, well, this is just stupid. But on the other hand, not many people look at their phones. Now, this guy was telling us all this, and at the end of the speech, he said, for you parents out there who think that you are doing a good job at monitoring your children, let me tell you the truth. Your children are no better than prison inmates. He said they're all prisoners and you're the warden. And as soon as you go in there and clean out their cell and you tell yourself, I've got it all, as soon as you turn the corner, those inmates are in there filing down a shank to get out of there. And so a couple of parents took issue with that. They didn't, of course, afterwards they didn't like that. We're calling kids prisoners. This guy wasn't saying your kid's a prisoner. This guy was using a metaphor. He was saying that this is how prisoners think, and he worked in the jail for 2 decades, how prisoners think when they're monitored closely by a warden is how teenagers think when they're monitored closely by a parent. And as soon as the parent thinks, oh, I've cleaned it out, you're wrong. And that's when you get stabbed in the back. That's what the guy said. He's using a metaphor. So you kind of have to understand how prison works, and then you can kind of understand how teenagers work. Is that true? I don't know. But it's a good metaphor. Somebody got on to me a month ago. A couple asked me about having kids. I think I told y'all this, and I said, what for? Kids are leeches. And I just shorthand. I wasn't saying that kids suck blood. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, to people who pride themselves on being selfish and investing only in themselves, children will suck the life out of you, so you might want to think about it. It's a metaphor. You know, I wasn't calling them blood-sucking animal. I'm just, it's a metaphor. When Paul talks about the true church, the real church, the one church, he uses metaphor. And so when we're going to talk about the church, what I want to do at different times is to look at the metaphors he uses. One of them, we'll do another time, is the body. So you kind of have to understand how bodies work. Well, what is it when he says body? When we say, what's a body do? Okay, now that we understand that, let's apply it to the church. There's another one he uses, the temple. Whatever the temple did, that's what the church is supposed to do. And we'll go over that at some point. Whatever the temple was supposed to do, that's how the church is supposed to do. The one I want to look at tonight is a metaphor he uses, the family. If you understand how a family operates, or how a family should operate, then you'll understand this is how a church should operate. I want to read to you a piece here. This is written by Colin Powell, and this is in his book. The book is called My American Journey. I think the book's 20 years old now, but it was a really good book. And Colin Powell, this is in his book. I'm just going to read, this is a piece of his book. He says, while I'm on the speech circuit, I always like to tell a story that I think is at the heart of America. He said the story is of ABC correspondent Sam Donaldson. Most of us remember Sam Donaldson. And Sam Donaldson is interviewing a young African-American soldier in a tank platoon on the eve of the Battle of Desert Storm. So we're early 90s. Donaldson asked this young African-American soldier, he said, how do you think the battle will go? Are you afraid? And the soldier responded, he said, we're going to do okay. We're well trained, and I'm not afraid. And Donaldson, the helicopters are all, whirling, and there's all this noise. Powell's talking about this in his book. He said, on the interview, you can't hear what the soldier's saying. And all the other soldiers behind him are shouting to him, tell him again, he didn't hear you. And the soldier says to his other soldiers, he says, this right here is my family, and we take care of one another, and that's why I'm not afraid. And Powell talks about the fact that these men aren't afraid to go in, not because we're so trained not to be afraid, but because they know they go arm in arm with other people. I'm going to read to you just this piece. He says, this story is a metaphor for what we ought to do as a country. We have to start thinking of America as a family. We've got to stop screaming at each other. We have to stop hurting each other. We have to start caring for, sacrificing for, sharing with each other. We have to stop constantly criticizing, because that's the way of malcontent. And we instead have to get back to a can-do attitude that once made America. We have to keep trying, risk failing, so that we can solve this country's problems. If we become cynics and critics, well, those critics and cynics will swoop down and pick apart everything that goes wrong. We will lose sight of what's right, decent, and uniquely good about America. I didn't tell you all this speech to be political. I like that because I think what Powell's trying to say about our country is what the church ought to be doing in the first place with the church. If we're waiting for America to get with it, you'll wait till the cows come home. The church has to set the pace. I want to look at some texts first about how we're supposed to see the church as family. We're going to start in the end of the New Testament here and work our way backwards. I want to read a text from 1 Timothy 3:15, and I'm going to follow it up with Hebrews 3, verses 5 through 6. And then we're going to, at some point, arrive at Matthew 18. But I do want to ask you this question, because I do like to start that way. Why do y'all think we have become such a people that cannot get along with people we disagree with? Does that make sense? People that we disagree with, we just can't find a reason to be around. If we don't agree with you, we don't like you. Why do you think we've become that way? Anybody got any ideas? I don't have like a Bible answer for this. I'm really asking, because it seems like if you're red, you're red. If you're blue, you're blue. If you're over here, you're over here. If you're over there, you're over there. And we're not going to associate with anybody in another camp. Why are we becoming that way? What do you mean?
I mean that so many people have no regard for Christian principles, which bear out and support the very thing that you're talking about. Christian principles are not quarreling and fighting with one another, but seeking to build up one another. And as a country, we've lost that, I think.
Well, but why do you think it's the issues that are causing us to be so divisive? Or do you think it's the issues? I'm literally asking because I am curious, because when I see a lot of fighting and hate.
Well, what we've done is we've replaced faith with self. So
okay,
if you say something I don't like, I'm going to be in your face.
And that's motivated by, you think that's just motivated by selfishness?
Self, yeah.
Did you say the same thing, Sandra?
And we've taken God out of the equation.
He just doesn't exist.
And I don't see you as a precious child of God. Not only am I focused on myself,
Okay,
but
okay.
I don't see you as important and special because you're God's child.
Wow, and that's kind of different from
I'm important and you not.
Yes, and that's two totally different things. Working in tandem is extremely dangerous. I don't know if y'all heard Paul. We have this selfish attitude. I just think about me, and I don't care about you. And so now that's causing this to happen. Anybody else here help me? Because I know we have Bob.
I get along pretty well with a lot of people I disagree with until they start trying to push that disagreement into action against me. If that's making sense.
No, it does. Do you think that we're susceptible to thinking that that's what they're doing when in reality they're not? Do you think that do you think we get sensitive about those things? If you and I don't agree and you talk about it, then I think you're just doing that because
it's possible, but in a lot of cases, it comes across as an agenda to affect my life.
Okay.
Rather than just a disagreement.
Okay.
And on the other side, they probably see the same thing. As lots of people disagree, but it becomes a heated argument or a polarized conversation when we start thinking that it's an agenda to affect my life or my space or my family or my job or whatever it is.
Yeah, I like a lot of the words you're using. Agenda and space. Those are pretty serious words because now it's not just that's the third element. I'm really thinking about me. I don't care about you, and now the thing that you're doing is now intruding. Trish?
I think the term "I'm entitled to my opinion" kind of makes people feel like they don't have to be respectful of whatever your opinion is.
Okay.
I'm entitled to think what I think is right, and you clearly have to be wrong if you're disagreeing with me. Instead of just having a friendly conversation and debate even, but I think there's an entitlement that comes with sort of our country now where, I'm entitled to say what I want to say when I want to say it, whether you like it or not, or whether it's even right or not.
Because it's my opinion.
Because I can. Just because I can.
The entitlement thing is dangerous. All these things are bad in of themselves. When you put them together, they're lethal, which may be a really good reason why we become so lethal in our dealings. If you don't think this is happening, turn on the TV or scroll down to the comments anytime you're online. And anything that gets posted, the comment section is where the abyss of hell is on earth, is at the comments section. It's just horrible. And so it's almost given us this avenue to throw bombs on one another anonymously. And so I say all that to think, Bill had a really good point. We've lost, he's using words we've all been, we are using that as Powell did about the United States or about country, about humanity. If you ask Paul the Apostle, when he says we, who is he talking about? The church. Paul does not have a whole lot of time to talk about what goes on outside these doors. And even with the Corinthian church, he's really just talking about whatever's going on there in Corinth. I guess whatever's going on there in Athens is okay, but really I'm just talking about you. And so we, us, is really just the church. And so if the church is the family, then, well, y'all have families too. When y'all meet for Christmas, aren't there people who meet for Christmas or Thanksgiving that you don't like? Please say yes, so I'm not alone. Do what?
They're family.
So they're family, but you gotta love them, whether you like them or not. But they don't have to stay long, hopefully. But I like that comment that it's blood. And so, but that seems to override the fact that we don't like what they say, or we don't like what they do, or we don't like how they look, or we don't like how they're presenting themselves. I got home early today and looked out the front. Jaheim went outside. He's got a big old truck. He went outside, which is fine. And he wears Donald Trump socks, which I'm tolerating, because he wears them brazenly, to whoever. And yeah, I guess I don't, and he, not that I'm not Republican or something, but he just does that. And then I see him go up the driveway in this truck, and I don't know where he's got it or how he's put it on, but it's this monstrous American flag that's now waving from the back of his truck. I'm not saying I'm not patriotic. It just kind of took me for a loop. It took me for a shock, because there are people who ride around in our county with big flags, and I look down upon them for behavior, and so I'm kind of thinking, what am I going to say? And my wife has to remind me we're all entitled to our opinion. You've raised these children to think on their own and do their own thing. Don't be upset when the things they do don't show. Now, stuff sounds bad, like I'm, anti-American or something, but it's just that people sometimes, as Bob brought up, sometimes people are brazen about what they do. And I think, they just flying that for an agenda? Or what if they're just flying it because they like the way it looks? What if it had nothing to do with me? And even if it did, why do I get so mad? I want to read some texts. I'm talking politics long enough. 1 Timothy 3:15, Paul says, "If I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves," my Bible has, "in God's house, which is the church of the living God." It's the pillar and the foundation of truth. I like that, house. Hebrews 3, verses 5 through 6. The writer says that Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what he said in the future, but Christ is faithful as a son over God's house. And we, got to be talking about the church, we are his house if we hold on to our courage and the hope of which we boast. This idea of house and home and household, this is family. This is how we're supposed to see the church. I want to look at one passage in particular. I told you I was going there last, and that's Matthew 18. And in Matthew 18, now Jesus is at the center here. This isn't Paul or the Hebrew writer. But the more I've been reading, I'm trying to read John this year and then trying to level it out with Matthew, because I don't understand John a lot. In this chapter, if I could pick 3 things that families ought to always remember. So if if you've got a family and you say, look, this is what families do, and it's at our core, and if we ever go against this, we're not a family. There are three big things in Matthew 18 that talk about, if you put them together, this is what families ought to be doing. And I think churches really ought to get Matthew 18 and carve it out and always keep Matthew 18 in front of them when we're talking about what's the church supposed to look like. What are we supposed to be doing as members of a church? So Matthew 18, verses 1 through 9, when you read all 9 of these verses, well, let's just read them. Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and they said, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? That's the question I want to ask. He calls a little child over that he called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these, I gotta get glasses. That's not good. If anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe, these are harsh words. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, well, cut it off, throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, just gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. That line in verse 7 is a little weird. It says, woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. The world's bad enough. When that gets allowed to seep in, under the doors and into the midst here, woe to the one through whom in which it came. Woe to the one who brought that in here. And he kind of turns it. We think where Jesus is going is, woe to the one who brought those worldly principles in here. And we think where he's probably going to go is that person's got to go. But that's not where Jesus is heading. Jesus thinks that in a family, all of us have to look out for one another. That's the first big thing. In a family, everyone looks out for one another. Everybody does. And I think that Jesus doesn't want our lives to be lived in such a way that other people get led astray. When we make an issue so big that we start to behave in a way that other people see that, well, then they start to have an opinion about us. Here's what I think happens with churches. Sometimes we get so numbers conscious we lose sight of the goal, and that's to be Jesus. Sometimes we get so program conscious and we really want all this to work that we lose sight of those who don't fit the program. We want this and everybody to get in, and not everybody gets in that. And when he says, I want you to be like this little child, what do y'all think he means here? We all have opinions about children. When he says, I want everybody to be like this child, what's he saying? And I think we got room for quite a few opinions here. Innocent? So they didn't do nothing wrong. Humble? So they don't think too highly of themselves. Some kids I know do.
Not judgmental.
Okay, not judgmental. Yeah, they don't see beyond certain things. What else?
Most of them all have a good disposition.
Most of them have a good... What kids are you talking about, Ron? Have a good disposition. Have you seen the kids? I can go either way. Oh, we're talking about little kids. Yeah, little kids. What else what's he talking about? Is a bomb about to go off? I don't know. Eager to learn?
They're really, whatever information they can take in, or like eager to please.
Yeah, there's that. in church on Sunday when I got there. The church I was at Scott Avenue. When you walk into the church, you're in the auditorium. So, there's no, if you're late, we all know. So that didn't stop a lot of people. But the doors open and bam, they already having Bible class, and I came in, talking about like this, and seeing him, and I got in, and the guy looked at me and he said, "Shh," and I said, "Ooh, all right." And the same guy. There was a little kid who was running around, and he reached around and grabbed this little kid. I mean, just grabbed him. And he didn't jerk him, he just stopped him. And he turned around, and he said, "Sit." And the child just sat, and he said, "Stay." And and I just started sweating, and I thought, ooh, when I was growing up, people said to me all the time, sit, stay, don't move. They said other words. You just had a license. We don't live in a world that really happens anymore. Just grab some random kid. But I have to assume that A, he knows the kid. B, this isn't his kid's first time to be told to sit. And C, this isn't this guy's first time to tell him. This is the same guy who told me, "Shh." But here's the thing. I don't think that guy had a judgment of the child. Because, why? He's a child. Yeah, he's just a child. And I'm not sure that the child really hates that guy. And I know he didn't because I saw him interacting later. I think when Jesus says, I want you to be a child, I think he wants us to take all that stuff that we've just kind of gathered all through the years. And we need to take all that, and we shouldn't let those things affect us. When they start to affect us, well, then we've kind of lost that vision that we have. And I really think families, when you have families here, nobody should be more important than anybody else. Everybody's important. I'll read to you a couple of scriptures. This is Romans 14, verses 13 through 15. "Let us stop passing judgment on one another. Make up your mind not to put a stumbling block or obstacle in your brother or sister's way. As one who is in the Lord Jesus, I'm fully convinced no food is unclean in of itself, but if anyone regards something as unclean, then for them it's unclean. And if your brother's distressed because of what you eat, well, you're not acting in love. Do not, by your eating, destroy your brother for whom Christ died." We all got to look out for one another. And letting everybody's issues cloud that, well, then we just start to act grown, and we're not really taking on the mind of a child. I'll read to you a couple of texts from James, because James is pretty to the point. James, a lot of times, is just grumpy. James 2, verses 15 through 17. He says, "Suppose a brother or sister don't have any clothes or daily food. If one of you says to him, 'Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed,' but you don't do anything about their physical needs, well, what good did you do? In the same way, faith by itself, that's not accompanied by action, is dead." Everybody's got to look out for one another. Everybody does. And when we stop, Paul brought this up. It's not just me being me. I don't look out for your best interest at all. Churches have got to always look out for everybody else, no matter who they are. Which leads me to the second part, and we've kind of already touched on it. Not only should we look out for other people, everybody is important. There's no one more important than anybody else. No titled person's better, this person's not better, the kids aren't better, the women aren't better, the men aren't better, the races aren't better, the politics aren't better. Nobody's better than anybody else. And if nobody's better than anybody else, everybody is on the same plane. And I think churches, we really ignore that. When you look at verses 10 through 14, this is right where Jesus shifts straight to this point. We all got to look out for each other because nobody's better than anybody else. Look at verse 10. He says, "See that you don't look down on one of these little ones." I think he's still talking about the kids. He says, "I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven." What do you think? This is verse 12. My Bible cancels out verse 11. What do you think, verse 12? If a person owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he's happier about the one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost. The church has got to make sure that everybody's just as important as everybody else. And there's nobody who's not important. And I think people have to feel that. They really do. When you ask, why does the shepherd leave the 99 and go off searching for the one? And you'd say, well, that was pretty foolish. But I know quite a few parents who have left children sleeping at home because something happened to another one and they tore out of there without any other warnings. And you can look and say, well, what if something happened there? What if something happened there? It's a risk you take because the risk to the other one is now greater. When you think about that with the church, none of us like to have less attention. And we fail to think about what other people are going. Y'all know people who, no matter what's going on, they've got to have the attention on themselves. If something happens to somebody else, it's like they've got to put on a bigger show to get the attention. I know y'all have seen this. We do this all the time. Humans do this all the time. We can't stand for other people to get this attention. I told a couple of you this a couple weeks ago. We did this funeral like 2 counties over, 3 counties over. And I think it was Robert who told me it was the smallest county. Isn't that right, Robert? This was the smallest county in Tennessee. So if that's wrong, that's Robert, not me. But you know what? After being to that county, I would believe Robert. But I'm behind the police escort, and this funeral was old school. I've done old school funerals. This was old school. And the police was in front of me, and the carriage is behind me. And I topped this hill, and on the left side of the road is a line of traffic. It's when my eyes see it, it was disorienting. Because we're in, I don't know where, Byrdstown. So I can't even tell you how to, you can't stop by Byrdstown. You have to try to get to Byrdstown. You got to try. There's no hey, I'm stopping it. No. You got to go out of your way. So when you top the hill and you see traffic, your brain malfunctions a little because you're not used to seeing that. Every car is bumper to bumper, but they're not on the road, they're pulled off the road. And everybody is standing outside their cars with their hand over their heart. When's the last time you've seen that? I'm sure you've seen cars pull over when the funeral procession comes in. But even if you go to Wilson County, the rules are if you have a funeral, you can't get on West Main. You can have a funeral, you can have an escort, but you may not get on West Main. You know, why? Well, because we all got places to be and we don't want to be interrupted by the funeral. Let's just go on and say what it is. But in this county, these people had nowhere to be. They had nothing to do but at that moment to honor the dead. And it was disorienting for me. The mailman with his package under his arm and his hat over his heart, the mail stopped while we passed. And it was, that idea is leaving. That's going away. And if you think it's not going away, it's going away. Because we think more about our time and our traffic patterns than other people. The church has to put our interest aside for those who aren't where we are. We have to see that everybody's important. And when you do that, so when everybody counts, when everybody's important, when we're seeing everybody like that, you get into this third part of Matthew 18. Jesus is on his progressionary move here. When you get to verses 15 through 20, when you've come to the conclusion that we've all got to, help one another, that we're all important to one another, verses 15 through 20, what you should get from this is that personal relationships If you're going to have a relationship with someone, resolving your differences is paramount to the relationship. You have to resolve it. You can't let it hang. You can't let it run the show. You have to resolve it. Look at verse 15. It says, if your brother or sister sins, I don't know. Do y'all have against you here? Does everybody have your brother or sister sins against you? Is this a yes? Is this a no? Yours is in the footnotes? So yours has if your brother or sister sins. Because by the way, what do you have?
If your brother sins against you.
You've got sins against you, and then ours is saying it's just sins. What'd you say?
Go and show him his fault.
Go and show him his fault. Notice these are two different readings here, so good luck with that. If your brother or sister sins against you, go show him his fault. But me and Trish's are, if your brother or sister sins, go and show him his fault. There's a huge difference here. One of them is it has to do with me, so I need to go tell you how you offended me. The other one is he just messed up. Is it my business? Jesus thinks it is your business, Dale.
As a student of the original text, what does it actually say there?
Yeah, against you's not in there.
I'm sorry?
It's not in there. That again, yeah, it's. You know what? I'm sure it's in some. It's in some, but it's not in good enough ones that they're that Trish's Bible puts it in there, and mine was good enough not to mark out.
How important is it that it says in mine, show him his fault in private? How important is in private to this discussion?
Where do you have in private? In verse, and you have that at the very beginning?
Uh-huh.
What does it say?
If your brother sins, go and show him his fault in private.
Mine says just.
I've got the New American Standard.
Oh, now I'm just, I'm no longer the student that Dale said I was. I have. Does anybody else have that? Go and show him his sin in private? Oh, no. Donna Mitchell has it too. Oh, no. Are we reading verse 15, or are we in another verse that I'm just... Oh, I'm sorry. I got to get reading glasses. I really think something's wrong. I'm getting to that point. Okay, go and show him his fault just between the two of you, and you haven't. Okay, man, I thought I was losing my mind. I thought, wow, maybe I whited it out and then didn't. Okay, I have just between the two of you in private. That's a really good... Did you ask how important is that?
Well, because you didn't say, like, between the two of you or in private, so just go show him his fault.
Yeah, okay, good point, Jeff.
Versus, can we talk about it?
Either way, if we go the first route, if he's offended me, or if he's just done something, me and Trish say, not me and Trish, but you get the point. If he's just done something we find offensive, either way, the texts agree on, it needs to be a private conversation. Oh, yeah. You are showing respect. If it's not private, what's the risk? If me and Ron disagree, and we need to have a discussion in private, and if we disagree, and now I'm just going to do it not caring if it's in private, what's the risk now? What's going on now in the second?
You're not going to find your brother if you do that.
People start taking sides.
Why do you say that? You said you're not going to find your brother if you do
I
that.
think you're going to push him away if you do it in front of the mass.
You think the masses is actually going to have it's going to have an effect on him. We're not going to be able to work it out. What did you say, Dale?
If you're doing it not between the two of you, that means there's other people around, and you got people taking sides.
Oh, because that's totally different. Now we're drawing people in. Now we're drawing lines. Yeah, you see how one little thing has all these repercussions to it. I've said it before, Jesus is a genius. He's God, so of course he is, but you get the point. It's a powerful text. Go and show them their fault just between the two of you or in private. If they listen to you, you've won your brother over. If they listen to you, you've won your brother over. But if they don't listen, okay, now we're going to go take some people with us. Take one or two others along so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And y'all should definitely have some quotation marks around that. He's quoting Scripture. He's quoting Deuteronomy, I think. He's saying, if you want to do it the biblical way, you're going to try to resolve it. If that didn't work, all right, we're going to go take some other sheep. Verse 17, if he refuses to listen to him, we'll tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, well, then treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. He says, I tell you the truth. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loosen on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I tell you, if the two of you on earth can agree about anything you ask for, it'll be done for you by my Father in heaven. And then there's that big verse, verse 20. For where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I am with them also. A lot of people take this and say, look, I went and told him, I took Brother Dale, we went and talked to him, made an announcement at church. Look, let's just disfellowship the guy. You know, it's like we wanted to go through each little progression. But I think we missed the point of what Jesus is trying to say. Look how much work it took to try to work it out. What do we do? And I say we, can't just be me. When someone offends me, what's the natural way to take care of this? Real quick, offend back. What'd you say, Martha? Blow them. Just don't even go. Just don't even address it. And that's usually the route most of us are going to take. Unfriend them because we don't want to see that at all. Quietly. What other route do we take here? It's not this one. Oh yes, we'll go recruit before we go to them. Yeah, we'll go talk about them. And it usually starts, hey, I just need your advice. What do you think I should do? Let me tell you my opinion. This is what the scoundrel did. Now, what do you think? Should we go do this? You know, you're just drawing them in here. But Bill said at the very beginning, we've lost our way. And I think the natural habit is to make an announcement at church about it, blast it on Facebook, then tell our friends, and then we go approach that person. And by the time we get there, we've scorched the earth. No wonder we can't get along, because we went the reverse. Jesus thinks that families ought to always be looking out for each other. Jesus thinks that families ought to consider everybody just as important as everybody else. And really good families will do whatever it takes to resolve the differences. Those differences will keep us apart. He says, verse 21, Matthew 18, verse 21. It says, Peter came to Jesus and he said, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he, what? Sins against me, up to 7 times. I said that against me thing. I brought it up because that's where that against you comes from. Is that the translators, or the people who were doing it, were tying verse 21 into verse 15. And while I don't think the phrase against you is in the text in verse 15, I do think we are supposed to read verse 15 and verse 21. But this is interesting. Jesus says, he sins against you, you got to go to him, you got to work it out, you guys got to come to an agreement. And if you skip all that other stuff and go straight to verse 21, what's Peter's question? I mean, how many times we got to go through this? If you think about what Jesus just said, we just got to do the whole, go to them and, I go to Ron, I meet with Ron, we couldn't work it out, I went to Dale, I went to Sandra, we tried to have an intervention with Ron, it just wouldn't work. I got some other people involved, it still wouldn't work, and so we kind of had the whole church talk about it with Ron, and then Ron said, you know what, I really like it here, I want to stay here, I think we can work it out. It took months. And then me and Ron have a disagreement again.
He's kind of hard.
We both are. Yeah, we both are. And I think Peter's asking, how many times do we all need to try to work? How many times do we need to try to work it out, I guess? I mean, when can we get to a point to where you just let it, just ignore him, just forget it? And Jesus says, yeah, glad you asked. A lot. Matter of fact, if it takes 4 to 8 months to work out a disagreement, Jesus says 7 times 70, so times 8 months, you're probably going to die trying to work these things out. That's the whole point. You should die trying to work them out. And Jesus is right into this story about forgiveness, which would lead me to believe that if you're going to be a part of the family, you really, really need to learn how to forgive. families have to constantly forgive. And what Bill brought up and what Brother Omi brought up, it means I cannot look to me. I have to look at you, and I have to let me go. Forgiveness is not, fine, I agree with you. Forgiveness is, I'm not going to hold that against you. That's a big deal. And I think if a church can learn how to do that, let's do this. If families could learn how to do that, the church could learn from the family. And I think it starts in family units. How many of you have seen churches where even the family started to fight? And the family fighting split. A family can't get along. How are we supposed to get along? You have a family, and then we've all liked these two individuals, and then they got a divorce. And then what happens? Yeah, split up teams. I got mine, you got yours, I'll take mine, and I can't go to church with you, and so I'll go to church over here, and I guess I'll take my people, you'll take your people. It's the opposite of what Jesus said do. Churches have got to try and act like families. We have to recognize there are people that we want to help. We want to make sure they have what they need. Bob said in the back, he said, when someone does something, I see an agenda, and they're encroaching on me. We have to see that other people don't even have enough to have an agenda, and we have to start to encroach on them to bring them up. There's a really, really old, I can't even find this magazine. It's an old magazine, but it's called Teacher Touch. I don't know if y'all remember that. It's old enough to where I still have the clipping, and it's old. But in this magazine, this guy named Billy Waters, he tells the story of this little girl who lost her arm in an accident. And for the longest time, the little girl don't want to be around anybody because she lost her arm. It's embarrassing. And finally, her mother talks to her. They've been going to church, but they don't go to Sunday school because that's where the other kids are. Y'all know kids would be mean. So she talked her daughter into going to Sunday school, and the mother, being a mother that she is, told the teacher the week prior, hey, she's coming to Sunday school. If you could maybe talk to the kids, you could just be aware of the fact she doesn't have an arm, so, no clapping games, I mean, just be conscious of the fact that she doesn't have an arm, and so she did that. Turns out that teacher got sick, and so replacement Sunday school, we all know how much prep we're going to put into replacement Sunday school. So this teacher comes in, she doesn't really have a lesson planned, this substitute comes in, and at the end, she tells all the kids, let's do the church song. You remember the old thing? Here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors, and there's all the people. Y'all remember that? You don't remember that? That's old as the hills. Yeah, that is old. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. That is old. Yeah. But she said, let's do it. Not thinking about the girl with the arm. And so they all put their hands together, and here they go, and here's the steeple, and the girl starts crying. And in the stroke of genius, Waters says one of the little boys walks over and holds out his hand. And the little girl takes her hand, and they put them together, and they do it awkwardly together. And Waters is telling, because all the kids thought that was the coolest thing that they did. And Waters tells the story, and he says, that's how the church should be. We think the church is about a song, or it's about a program, or it's about a simple thing we can all remember. But the church really is us finding others and helping each other to form the true church. And I think that story is probably what Jesus has in mind. That everyone's important. Nobody's more important than the other people. We always have to try and work out any difference we have, and we have to constantly forgive so that the issues and the fighting don't become the church. Let the church drown out the issues and the fighting. Let's pray. Holy Father, we fail to be what you want us to be. And we do it in our families and in our friends and especially in the church. We really fail in the country. Father, help the church to find its way. Help us to find each other. Help us to be willing to leave the lost, the found sheep